Hi, my name is Mel, and I'm going to be talking about risk analysis in IT and cybersecurity and why it's so important for probably anyone to do, whether you're a single person or anybody who's got, like I said, small business or IT company, anything at all, right? It's a systematic process of identifying and evaluating and prioritizing potential threats and vulnerabilities to digital assets. Its primary goal is to help businesses or people understand the likelihood of a security incident happening and the potential impact it could have on the business, allowing the people and the leaders to make informed, cost effective decisions about resource allocation and defense strategies. And also, it can look if you're a small business owner or like a single person, it helps you by understanding risk analysis in IT and cybersecurity. It helps you understand what do you need to be worried about, what you should be protecting, and why do you need to be worried about it, okay? So cyber risk is generally equals threat times vulnerability times asset value. So, and only the person, the business, or the organization can work this out. Because the asset value is going to be not just hardware and software, it could be information, processes, people, and you need to understand that that is all part of it. So if you're just an individual or a small business, medium business, you need to identify what is most at risk, what is most valuable to you, what is most valuable to other people, like if you've got customers and other companies that you deal with. And so you need to work this out. And so you've also got to look at what sort of threats are out there, what sort of vulnerabilities do you have, and then you need to sort of start appropriately looking at how you can manage that, okay? So there's some key analytical methodologies, and without going into too much complicated detail, so there's qualitative risk analysis. So uses descriptive states like low, medium, high to evaluate scenarios based on hopefully expert opinion, experience, evidence, and intuition. It's fast and accessible, but it is quite naturally subjective. Quantitative risk analysis assigns more precise numerical and financial assets values to risks. It uses metrics like single loss expectancy or annualized loss expectancy to answer exact monetary questions such as potential data breach costs. So if you're like a small business or an individual person, you don't have to go into, I mean, you can if you want to, but you could look at this is if your bank details are taken, they can take money from you. If your personal information is put out there, you could be put at personal risk, physical risk, psychological harm. People can take your information, spread it out. They can forge your identity, take loans out in your name. If you're a business, obviously your data, your workers' data, your customers' data, also financial information, that's also at risk. So this is things that you need to understand that they do have a cost. If you have that information taken or interfered with, that's going to cost you and can be quite expensive. So there's mathematical formulas that come into this. So the single loss expectancy, this is the monetary loss expected from a single security incident. So the asset value multiplied by exposure factor, where exposure factor is the percentage of the asset lost during the incident. And this could be whatever that asset is, could be information, hardware, software, something else, okay? And there's also annualized rate of occurrence, estimated number of times a specific threat will exploit a vulnerability within a single year. And there's annualized loss expectancy, the total projected financial loss per year for a specific risk used directly to justify security budgets. So you got to think about it this way. If you're a person or a company, however big your size, you generally want like your banks and whatever companies you deal with, even as a single person, to generally trust you. But if you're constantly getting your information all out there, they're going to start blocking bank accounts. You might not be able to order shopping online. You're going to start having emails from all sorts of weird and wonderful things. You're going to get a lot of issues, and people are just going to be going, "What are you doing?" So you want to think that, you know, you want people to not think, like you're just causing all this havoc. So you have some responsibility towards yourself and to others to take care of your IT and network security. So this is where a risk analysis is very important to be done. Now, you can do it very easily and quickly. You can certainly get AI help in that. And I mean, the more complicated or the bigger the company, the more you need to worry about it, obviously. But look, so, there's a step-by-step risk analysis process. So, how does this work? And an effective risk assessment will follow a structured, repeatable cycle. Okay, so scope and asset inventory. So, identify all of your infrastructure, data repositories, cloud environments, physical assets, software, personnel, whatever that requires protection. Okay, whether you're one person, a small business, medium business, large organization, whatever. Okay, so if you're just a single person, you might have multiple devices. So you might have a computer, laptop, desktop, you might have a tablet, you will probably have a phone, you might have a printer, you will have some other devices as well. You might have smart devices like a smart fridge or something, home-based network. Okay, so these are all things that you've got to think about. Also, you got to do what other, apart from just the physical hardware, you need to think about, okay, I have Windows operating system, or I have Apple, or I have Linux, or my phone is running Chrome OS or Android or whatever it's doing. Okay, I run this web browsers, I run Microsoft Word, or I run, I don't know, Minecraft, Discord server, I run, I have these email, and so you need to think about all of the, if you don't know, you can look this up of how to find out what you've actually got on your system. And you should know what you've got and whether should you have it or should you not, because a lot of people have a lot of stuff in the system. They don't know what it does and they don't need it. Okay. And so all of this stuff needs protection. You need physical protection, you need protection of the hardware and all of the software, you need IT and cybersecurity protection. Okay, that just is. Right? You hopefully lock the front door to your house. You should also, have PIN numbers and passwords on any device, like a phone, tablet, computer, or otherwise. You should know how, if you've got smart devices like smartphones or anything else like that, smart fridges, should hopefully know at least how they work and how they operate. If you've got external web cameras, how do they work? What are the risks there? Okay, so when I'm saying you need to stop and really think this through, it is very important. Okay, then you've got a threat identification, map out potential internal and external events or actors that could cause problems. So, threat identification. So, like a webcam can be hijacked, security cams can be hijacked, your computer can be hijacked. People can steal your phone and take your data. They can steal your credit card information. People can hack networks. So this is about, you know, if you've got, like, have your equipment, even if it's just in your home, in a cool, dry space that's reasonably clean. And, have a PIN number on it, have basic password protection, and you can have multi-factor authentication, stuff like that. So if you on a small or medium business, or any organization for that matter, you want to have your computer equipment generally a bit more secure, all right? So your average, what you might everyday workers and you use might just be in an office environment. But again, you would have PIN numbers and multi-factor authentication and biometric security sometimes for these devices. But like if you're going to have like servers and modems and routers which will enable you to network, then you need to have that in a physically locked room with much tighter security. Okay, so you want to watch physical access. You also then want to monitor digital and electronic access. Okay, so threat of identification, and you want to look at what could happen, like ransomware, phishing, misconfigurations, and how to try and avoid them in the best way possible. Then vulnerability assessments. Scan for active system weaknesses, unpatched software, weak access controls, or process gaps that threats could exploit. So this is vital. So you should always have your operating system, whatever that is and whatever device it's on, to always update regularly. All right, because the more software always updates itself to fix previous bugs, to fix known security flaws. All software will bring out updates and patches. Install them and use them. Like with operating system updates, they usually happen. You can set them automatically. All right, you should absolutely do that. But look, you can say, what are the common vulnerabilities that, say, a Windows desktop might have, or what are some of the more common vulnerabilities that an Android phone might have? And you go, how do I, as a non-technical person, can use AI for this, or Google, or whatever else you want to use? How can I, as a non-technical person, secure this as best I can? How do I protect myself? Okay. And there's like password managers that are free, like Bitwarden. You can use a virtual private network. I would recommend that highly. There's all sorts of other things you can do. So you can also look at the consequences. Calculate the overall likelihood of exploitation and determine what impact that would have on you or the business across financial, legal, operational, or reputational demands. And I mean, like, if your company has been data breached and customer information or whatever's all over the place, you're going to lose customer trust and reputation. You could lose personal trust, and you could also be sued by the government, or you could get government fines, you could be sued by other companies or people. You could lose money, you could operational problems, and there's multiple different things. So you've got to think about the consequences of what this could be. And don't always assume the worst case, but don't always assume the least case. So you've got to stop and think from all cases, what would be the worst case scenario? What's the absolute worst thing, and what would you think would happen? And you need to stop and think about how you would address that, because it might. It might not, but it might. So control evaluation. You need to audit or get someone who knows what they're doing to audit existing technical or administrative safeguards to see if they successfully minimize the inherent threat. So this could be like, does your business, even if it's a small business, do you have like a reception or a front, like people, some sort of like way of monitoring who's coming in and going out, like, is your, any equipment sort of that you use, other than maybe point of sale software, and that's debatable, but that's quite risky, some of that too. But like, if you're a person too, so you've got to look at, whatever, whoever you are, business or otherwise, you need to look at what safeguards that you can do to minimize the threats. You will not stop it. There's nothing, no such thing as being unhackable. Prioritization and documentation. Look, it does help, definitely, and I know this is time consuming and definitely annoying, but to plot any sort of results onto an impact likelihood matrix, or to, formalize, even if you just do it roughly on, like Excel or Word, or whatever, just go, okay, like threat, someone breaks in, okay, steals my equipment. 2, someone accesses my computer and gets my, like whatever. So you can plot, like prioritize sort of certain threats, and then you can say, what would be the impact of that and how likely are they to occur? And all of those are very likely, and the impact is quite high. So you can prioritize high risk items and compile, hopefully, an actionable mitigation roadmap. So there are some industry standard frameworks that people do operate off. Australian government, we've got an Essential 8. There's NIST. There's ISO IEC. There's FAIR, which is Factor Analysis of Information Risk. There's risk treatment options. So what are the risk treatment options? Mitigation. Employ technical controls like multi-factor authentication, password managers, browser control, antivirus, anti-malware, all that sort of stuff. Firewalls to actively reduce the threat level. Transfer risk. So you can shift the risk burden elsewhere. So some companies will commonly purchase a cyber insurance policy or outsource operations to a third-party vendor. Now that is problematic because most everyday people and small and medium business probably can't afford to do that. And like a lot of cyber insurance policies, they are not going to cover you if you are not doing the bare basics to protect yourself and your assets and information. Okay, they're just going to go. Okay, we all know the insurance policies don't like to pay out. So you can, I would think cyber insurance policy for companies who can afford it is a good idea. But you should absolutely need to have, risk analysis, documentation, and everything else. And they're going to want to see that. And companies, like bigger companies and more employees, especially in healthcare, finance, anything like that, you are going to require government to know, the government's going to want to, there's legislation, privacy of information, confidentiality of information. So you need to stick to legislation too. So you need compliance. You do not want to get in hot water. So look, transference is an option, but there's risks to that. It's cost prohibitive. And there could be issues around it. Avoidance. Eliminate the risk by stopping the vulnerable activities, such as shutting down an insecure legacy application. Look, if that is an option you can take, you probably should. You should look at anything like any applications you do not use or older, if you can upgrade any hardware to more recent stuff that it's not legacy, which will be more secure. You can upgrade it in stages. I don't suggest doing it all at once. It is expensive, but you definitely should look at doing that. Definitely, if you've got legacy hardware applications, you're definitely in a lot more risk. Okay, so upgrade where and when you can. I would always say that. Acceptance. Well, you definitely need to do this. Acknowledge the risk without taking action. Well, you shouldn't do that, usually because the cost of fixing the problem outweighs the total potential asset damage. Look, rarely is that true, because you got to think like cost in terms of monetary cost of the problem might outweigh the total asset. But you got to think in terms of also not just the asset, but like reputational, financial, legal, and anything else that can come into. So that's, look, I would not say take the risk without taking any action. You obviously have to take actions that you can afford and you can do. You should just not do nothing. You should do something. Okay? And obviously what action you take has to be reasonably cost effective. And you can't just, wing it. So this is where you would probably get someone to come in, talk to someone about, like, who are you, what sort of money can you spend, what sort of systems do you have, and people can give you some options. Now, there are some free and cheap solutions out there, all right? And there's open source free solutions that you can use. There's some free antivirus and malware, free VPN. There's different sorts of applications, programs, and tools and stuff you can do that are free or low cost that can help reduce risk. And you can do things yourself. Again, like, don't have programs that you don't need and don't use. Okay, big one. If you know how, or if you don't know how, get someone who does know how to close down any ports. And ports are just it's a software thing in general, or a network thing. It can be a hardware thing too, but I'm just saying it's a way of entry of information in and out of a computer. Okay, you can do things like, have just general, like, common sense, practical defenses that you don't need to spend a lot of money. So I think you have to accept some level of risk. You do. You should not take no action, but honestly, like, how much action you're going to take and what you're going to need to do is going to depend on how much you can afford to spend, and you want it to be cost efficient and cost effective. Okay, so this again is going to be, look at free options and cheaper options where you possibly can get them. And they definitely are available, and some are better than others. All right. So I think I would advise that. I would not advise not doing anything, because you can have multi-factor authentication quite easily. People get a code on the phone or the tablet or whatever else, or, without it costing an awful lot, and probably a lot of times nothing at all. You can have, like, there's free VPNs, you can have a firewall. There's some free firewall things you can do. Like, Windows has a default firewall, Windows has a default antivirus. They do other operating systems. Well, you can get free ones anyway. There's things you can do that are not very cost prohibitive. So I would not, like, yes, you do have to accept the risk, but no, you should not take no action. You should take action, but this is where you got to start looking at the most cost efficient action you can take that you can afford. Okay? And you got to be aware that your system is at risk. Even with, even the most expensive whatever controls in place, your system's always going to be at risk. There's always a risk. And, like, how much you can do about that and how much you able to do about that is going to very much depend on what systems, your computer systems you've got, your physical setup, everything else. Okay, so this is just talking about, you need to start looking at, if you're a small business, or have your, computer networks, not just open out to public, don't have, public Wi-Fi, just don't have access points available where everyone can see them, like, try and just have them in a back room or something, just use a bit of common sense. If you're just a person at home with multiple devices, and usually, you've got a computer or phone or a tablet or other devices, just use a bit of common sense there. There's free options you can do to secure lots of different systems, and I would look into that if I were you. But like analyzing your risk in terms of IT and cybersecurity is very important for everybody. Okay, because people are taken for for money and information every 2 seconds, quite honestly, or more every day, and it's we got to acknowledge that while networks and computers do make some life easier, there's inherent risk in it. So look, this is just helpful to, and like how good your risk analysis is going to depend on you, your organization. And also you got to remember, like if you're a company or even a person, you want to try and avoid legal complications, obviously, or reputational damage, because that's not going to help you or your company or whatever else. So you got to think, okay, what you can look this up, use, your favorite browser to search this up, your laws in your particular area. So things like privacy of information, like confidentiality, you've got to be aware, um, like if you interact at all with, even if you're just a small, single person with single device, you interact all the time with other devices. Your phone interacts with other devices. So you've got to have some care for yourself and others. Okay. So that's just risk analysis, bare basics. Thanks.